The one thing that the New Age people had that was interesting is that they couldn't shut up about quantum mechanics. And I thought this was very interesting because they kept saying that quantum mechanics were this and that. They're the key to having superpowers and all this other kind of stuff. But what I was mostly interested in is like, well, what does this mean for the free will stuff? And that's where I got some hope. So here, let's go to this video now. And this guy, like for all the quantum stuff, and even I'm going to mention a math thing later, I'm out of my depth. Okay. Like I'm no physicist. I'm no mathematician. So I defer to people who are smarter than me, or at least to ChatGPT, who can, at least query those smarter people. But here's some famous physicist talking about quantum mechanics and determinism.
Newtonian determinism says that the universe is a clock, a gigantic clock that's wound up at the beginning of time, and it's been ticking ever since according to Newton's laws of motion. So what you're going to eat 10 years from now on January 1st has already been fixed. It's already known using Newton's laws of motion. Right. Einstein believed in that. Einstein was a determinist. Does that mean that a murderer, a horrible mass murderer, isn't really guilty of his works because it was already preordained billions of years ago? And Einstein said, well, yeah, in some sense that's true. Even mass murderers were predetermined. But he said they should still be placed in jail. Heisenberg then comes along and proposes the Heisenberg uncertainty principle and says, nonsense. There's uncertainty. You don't know where the electron is. It could be here, here, or many places simultaneously. This, of course, Einstein hated because he said God doesn't play dice with the universe. Well, hey, get used to it. Einstein was wrong. God does play dice. Every time we look at an electron, it moves. There's uncertainty with regards to the position of the electron. So what does that mean for free will? It means in some sense we do have some kind of free will. No one can determine your future events given your past history. There's always the wild card. There's always the possibility of uncertainty in whatever we do. So when I look at myself in a mirror, I say to myself, what I'm looking at is not really me. It looks like me, but it's not really me at all. It's not me today, now. It's me a billionth of a second ago, because it takes a billionth of a second for life.
Yeah, I don't know what he's talking about there, but now, so this quantum thing, why was this a big deal for me? Well, it was a big deal because it proved, it seems pretty, much accepted across all scientific, consensus that the universe is not actually fully deterministic. Mostly it is, but it's not fully, okay? And that was enough for me to at least, crack open this door back into willpower again, because it's like, all right, now there's a chance. There's a fighting chance. And it's not a perfect chance because, of this. This is a comment on that actual video where the guy said, well, I wouldn't call the randomness in quantum mechanics our free will, since we do not determine the outcome of the random process. And that's a good point, right? And like, I don't really have, basically it's like, I don't know the mechanism, right? And the chances like that we could have some kind of quantum computing in our brain, maybe through some act of will or something we have actual control over, we can stir up some kind of quantum event that causes an electron to go down this neural pathway rather than this neural pathway. The scientific community, mixed on that, mostly negative. They don't think the brain can do things like that. But I don't know, there's enough uncertainty there to where we don't know. And so I'm going to run with it because even people who believe in determinism believe that you have to run with free will on some level, or else you're going to end up very depressed and dysfunctional. So moving forward, we're going to assume that free will exists, on an objective level, at least possibly, because we have to assume that because we don't know for certain it doesn't exist. But we're going to, for practical purposes, we're going to just assume that it's there because we need it anyway. Orbital Hub says pineal gland would be the gateway. Maybe. I don't know. Ehab says, I think you would enjoy the work of late Catholic philosopher Wolfgang Smith. I'll have to check them out. Yeah. Pei says universe is way too complex to be deterministic. It's deterministic in some regards, stochastic or chaotic in others. Yeah. I mean, so basically I think there's a good argument to be made that, yeah, there's some wiggle room in the system. So like what we're going to be operating with moving forward is that free will exists, but most things are deterministic. All right. And I think we can all agree with that like cause and effect, it tends to carry out. Right. And I'm not going to go down the whole philosophical rabbit holes of non-duality and that, cause and effect is just an illusion, all this kind of stuff. Like I went there, it just ends up being like a big masturbatory, like, I think waste of time. But the thing that we got to get at is like, if there is some little bit of wiggle room in here where things are not deterministic, how can we generate maximum positive change from that bit of wiggle room? And so the Sam Harrises of the world, they decide, I'll use logic. And then they feel really cool, like really cool doing that. And I know because I was this guy. And it's like, I'm going to be this logical dude, and that's how I'm going to take care of everything. And the idea is basically like this. It's like logic exists up at the top of the hierarchy. And by using our logic, aka our prefrontal cortex, we can use it to override or reorganize our emotional states in our limbic system. And then if we can do that properly, then we can lead ourselves to taking good, positive action. Seems pretty sensible. Seems pretty logical, right? But there's some issues with it, okay? And the first issue is that what I would call the is-ought problem. So what the heck is the is-ought problem? I tried to find like a good, concise video explaining this, but they were all kind of lame. So I'm going to try and do my best to explain this to you. Basically, the idea is that logic can solve for X, but it can't tell you what X should represent. So if we're just talking about, a math equation, 5 plus X equals 6, well then what's X? Okay, it's 1, right? 5 plus 1 equals 6. And most mathematics and logic is pretty much just more complex versions of that, right? And logic's really good at doing those kinds of things. But what's a counter example to where this fails? So like, say we want to go to our friend. Well, this is not the counter example. This is just another example of how logic works. So like the shortest path to your friend's house, because you want to get there quick. He's got a new video game and you want to play it with him. And so, you can put it into Google Maps, and Google Maps can run an algorithm that'll tell you the shortest path there. Boom. Awesome. Logic is amazing. But what if you want to figure out your life path? Okay. Well, the path, we're like, well, what variables are we going to optimize for? How do we do that? Do we want to make the most money? Well, that could be a pretty straightforward equation if you think about it long enough. Or what if we want to, maximize fun, or we want to maximize work-life balance, or we want to, maximize our ability to make positive impact on the world, or we want to maximize our ability to enjoy things. Or maybe you want to do all of those, right? That's usually the issue, is that then we got a bunch of variables we're trying to solve for, and we don't know how are we going to weight all of these? How are we going to organize them all? And eventually logic just peters out, and we are left with no direction. We don't know what we're doing. And what I found is that most important life decisions, they're not ones that can be solved purely with logic. And so when I'm trying to construct my whole discipline mentality off of like, find the most logical thing, get my emotions to deal with it and do it, it starts getting really difficult, right? So the next issue with logic is that overriding emotions with logic tends to lead to dysfunctional behavior. And this is something that I came to learn in excruciating detail in my own life, and then also with the countless dudes now that I've coached. Okay. And so what does this mean? So if your logic is supposed to sit as the king atop of the mountain, telling everybody else what to do, what that typically amounts to is your emotions just getting overridden, right? It's like, all right, well, the logical thing for me to do right now is to get up early and get to work, right? And you keep doing that and you apply that to everything. It's like, well, the logical thing for me to do is to not eat that sweet and to instead eat my vegetables and lean meat. And the logical thing for me to do is to skip going out and seeing my friends and to get this extra work done, because if I just grind 80 hours a week for the next 2 years, I could retire. And that would be the most logical thing. And then I could have as much fun as I want with my friends, right? If you keep going on like this, what tends to happen is that your emotions, they rebel. They rebel. And what you do then is you just kind of fall into escapism. And so like my whole thing was, when I was first kind of like getting out of my dysfunctional states, was quitting porn was like the first big thing I needed to do, because porn used all of my, energy. Not all of it, but like that was a big bunch of it, right? Like I couldn't get my business going. I couldn't focus. I couldn't like be productive. I couldn't like really just be the guy that I wanted to be. And I noticed that when I just tried to logically override my desire to use porn, it actually led to more porn use. And so something was wrong with that. And I've seen that over and over again. A guy who just tries to squash emotion for the supremacy of logic doesn't really get him very far, particularly any sort of deeper habit change. James Watson says repression builds up and eventually explodes. Absolutely. It's kind of like you keep trying to like stuff emotion into a trash bag, but eventually the trash bag can't like hold it anymore. And it comes out in a completely uncontrolled manner, like this, puts garbage all over your floor, metaphorically. And we got another issue here with logic. And this one I think is very important, even if it doesn't necessarily seem as important on paper. And that is, it leads to like logic, like overemphasizing logic makes you feel like a robot. And it makes you feel less free. And personally, the whole reason I was interested in willpower and discipline and that sort of thing is because I wanted to feel free, right? I wanted to feel like I was free to be like the best version of myself, the man that I really wanted to be. And the more that I tried to just crank on my logic, the less free I felt. The more, and even when I succeeded, because sometimes you can get really good at repressing your emotions. And then you just become like this super buttoned up, locked down, like robotic like person. You lose your warmth, and also you lose like your ability to enjoy things, because what this comes to is like overliving in your prefrontal cortex and then not really letting your limbic system activate very well. So you stop getting the joy out of life, even if you're doing good things. And it sucks, frankly, and it's not really worth experiencing if you're interested in it. And this is one of those like things that so many guys they want to be able to become this like machine, and you really don't. You really don't. It's not fun. So if submitting to logic alone isn't the answer, well then what is? Great question, Sam. Desire, aka emotion, should be your core driver.